and welcome to the Curse Discussions podcast, episode, I think, what is this, 7 or something? Yeah, I think it's 7. I, once again, am Chucky R. Law. With me today, we have Mr. Herbert, John, and, returning again, Andre Ago. And so today on the Curse Discussions podcast, we're going to be discussing... in general, we're going to be discussing places, locations, sort of our opinions on, which places are shitholes, which places are less shitholy. Holy sounds like some kind of thing on a donut, like a donut ad. Holy, like this donut's extra holy. I don't know. Okay.
Oh God.
So anyway,
that was bad.
Off to a great start.
To start off, let's talk about. Let's limit ourselves to the North American continent.
I would start by saying Ciudad Juarez, kind of a shithole, kind of a crime-filled turret for limiting ourselves to North America. Most of Mexico, pretty bad.
Okay. Yeah, that is right. Mexico is technically in North America, even though it culturally it's spiritually.
It's spiritually Central American. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Isn't that kind of funny? Geography doesn't always line up with culture. Wow. Yeah. This has been a video by Real Life Lore.
Yeah, geography doesn't care about your feelings, snowflakes.
Libtards VTFO. Okay, but I mean, now Latin America and Mexico specifically, we can talk about, sure. But I think that there's at least sort of a theme that
it's just universally fucking terrible. What point is there even in talking about
it? Okay, well,
that
you can say that, but aren't there some parts that are relatively nice, right? As I understand it, Latin America is very highly segregated, and it's segregated, mainly on the bounds of an upper class and a large underclass that kind of makes everything shitty, but there's some nice areas, right? That are.
What's weird is when you meet a white Hispanic person who is from a truly shit tier like a shit tier even by Latin American standards country.
You mean
if you meet
Louis C.K.?
Well, no, he's from Mexico. By Latin American standards, especially if we don't consider the last decade or so when it's gotten really bad. Mexico is a lot better than a lot of countries, but you meet someone from Nicaragua or El Salvador, and they're a white Hispanic, and you're like, how do you even exist? How are you a person? I thought everyone from
Are there fucking white people in Guatemala?
Member.
I didn't know that was real.
I'm sure.
Yeah, there's a few of them, and they live in gated communities.
Mm-hmm.
That's my point. They're
and they have these whole, they have these security. They basically have legions of security. They patrol the perimeter of their property all day.
I mean, isn't Guatemala just jungle anyway? I don't think there's tons of ghettos or something. I think it's just jungle.
I think there's quite a few I mean, it's third world, so there's going to be ghettos.
Well, there's Guatemala City, and that's an urban area.
Okay. What is
my understanding of Mexico is that the vast majority of the country is more or less a failed state at this point. The drug card, there's a few key little cities, major cities that the government still has control over, Mexico City and Monterrey and Guadalajara and the vacation spots Cancun and Cozumel and all that kind of crap. But in most of this kind of flyover country of Mexico, it's more or less controlled by cartels at this point.
Well, I think that might be a good thing. That's pretty ANCAP.
Yeah, failed state sounds pretty libertarian to me.
I mean, okay, we can joke about it, but I think there really was something like that. I remember reading about it was sort of a private security company basically that had taken over a few towns in Mexico. It was basically sort of competing with the cartels and just was not really subject to the government. I don't know, if that was exaggerated or what. I don't remember. I'd have to pull up the article. So yeah, that legitimately is pretty ANCAP. And even besides that, I think there's a case to be made from a libertarian point of view for some sort of critical support, maybe of the drug cartels against some of these Latin American states.
Well, especially if they're fucking commies.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'd probably rather live in like a gangster's paradise than a worker's paradise, to be honest.
Wasn't that like the situation in like Colombia? Like,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Colombia was like that way for a while. Like the places that were run by like the Medellin cartel and like all that were like a lot or considerably wealthier than the places not run by the drug cartels.
Based. I mean, Colombia actually, I think, is a pretty good country now. I mean, pretty good relatively.
Well, I mean, by Latin American
Yeah, by
standards,
Latin
sure,
American
but
standards,
I mean,
yeah.
I still think it's like GDP per capita is significantly lower than Mexico, though.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
I mean, what was
I
the
think.
what's the comparison between Colombia and a place like Bolivia? I don't know. Does anyone like? We're talking
Bolivia is like a backwater.
about
Bolivia is like really poor. It's like one of the poorest Latin American countries, I'm pretty sure.
There's like almost nothing there, really. I mean,
That's funny because it may be the poorest Latin American country, and Bolivia kind of sounds like a really like fat girl's name. Like I'm Bolivia. So that makes
Oh
sense.
my god! Well, because Olivia is like a fat girl's name, and then you
Bolivia.
just add the B.
I mean, the V just like accentuates it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the whole thing. Like fat people who like say the letter B really funny, and so like it's a name designed to be said by its fat owner. Like I was just drinking some buttermilk and eating bread, and my name's Bolivia.
Oh, that's perfect. That's very deep, man. It's like a name attached to you. Huh? It's kind of like
my
imagine
God.
if you were
It's an onomatopoeic name or whatever the fuck.
imagine
Right?
if you were.
It sounds like what it describes.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Imagine though, if you were like from some tribe where you had evolved the ability to make like these weird clicking sounds that no one else could make, and so your name was something in those clickies. Your name was like that's basically what it is for like Bolivia. Okay, this is already gone completely off topic. Like we're like 7 minutes in.
Yeah, this is derailed pretty quickly.
I don't know. I think this will be entertaining to listen to. Hopefully. But anyway, so Latin America, um, Chile is pretty good, from what I understand. Le based Pinochet helicopter man XDDDD.
I mean, I think that Argentina is not supposed to be like a terrible place to live, especially in the cities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
It's
like,
a
the good
nice
ones
place.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a nice place, but I think like it underachieves because its government is like really statist.
Yeah.
I hear like that Uruguay is a pretty good place too. Or I don't know how you pronounce it.
Isn't Uruguay
Yeah,
like?
it's like the first country that legalized weed.
Isn't it like 90% white or something?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Argentina and Uruguay are like kind of white, relatively speaking.
Well, see that's the thing though. But I mean, Uruguay specifically, I think is very white. Like Argentina and Chile are a little bit less white. Uruguay, I think, is really white though. But still, all of the three are relatively white compared to like somewhere like Brazil or something. But if we're talking about, I always find it interesting because Uruguay, right, is not to be confused with Paraguay, which is not white at all. Paraguay is like, not only is it native, it's like 90% native or something, and
Well, you can hear it in the name. It's like the disabled version of Uruguay.
yeah, exactly. There you go. No, but
It's like a tiny step up from Bolivia. It's like basically the same country.
Apparently,
Apparently, like the Bushes own a bunch of land there,
Oh, really?
which is really weird.
The Bush family, like the
Yeah, or they
American
used to.
That's
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, I don't know if they do anymore, but I know they did at one point. It's kind of
Okay.
strange.
I was gonna say I think Paraguay has a really interesting history, though. So I think they speak. I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, but like Guarani there or something, in addition to Spanish. Which is like the indigenous language there. But almost everyone speaks it, as I understand. So they kind of use that code with Spanish. It used to be a fairly powerful country too in the past, but it just got taken the fuck out in this the Paraguayan War. Do you guys know about that?
Oh yeah, like basically everybody besides them fought in a war against them, like Brazil and Argentina.
Yeah, yeah. It was
And like somehow they thought that was a good idea to like declare war on everybody at once.
well, I mean, at first they were doing all right because what they were doing was they were supporting, I think, a faction in Uruguay in a civil war, but then that civil war lost. They lost in that civil war, and Argentina was supporting the other side, and then Brazil joined in, I think, and they just got fucking gang raped. And
Brazil.
they lost like 2/3 of their population or something insane like that. Like they like literally their country was just like depopulated in a way that's fairly unprecedented in modern warfare.
Well, I think a lot of that. I do know they lost a lot of people from like deaths, but a lot of it was that they lost a ton of territory
Yes,
too, right?
that's true as well. Yeah. I'm not sure what percentage of it actually died, but I do know that this is something that's always just seems so insane to me. You know, if you look at how Wikipedia, when it has like an article about like a war or something, it'll tell you the size of both armies, and it'll tell you the casualties, right? So it showed like, the size of the Paraguayan army, and then the casualties are larger than the Paraguayan army. So they lost basically they lost more people than they had in their entire army, right? Like when you include civilians. Anyway,
Right, and I think like all their leaders were killed too, like all their generals basically.
yeah. Yeah, the last guy, I forget his name. I think it was Lopez or something. He was a dictator, and he just like never surrendered, right? Like he literally like had to be like hunted down personally, and then when they tried to capture him, he like attacked the like Brazilian general or whatever, like physically, and then
Right,
they
we
just
should
killed him.
probably stop talking about this though. This is pretty like derailing.
Okay, yeah, we're talking about places. Okay, so Andriago, what's your favorite city in the U.S. and why?
Uh, do I have to give like one?
Give your top two.
Um, does it have to be like I don't know how
Give your
populous
top
does it have to be?
three.
Like, does it have to be like a major
Give
city
your
or
top
like?
four.
Okay, well, I'll just say my top two are probably. Well, I'm just gonna say like the general like metropolitan area or like wider contiguous area because I can't really narrow it down to a city, but probably like northern Virginia
The Army of Northern
and
Virginia.
Seattle, the
Okay.
greater Seattle area.
So Northern Virginia, what cities are there? I don't even know. Like, is that like Alexandria?
It's like yeah, like
Alexandria.
Arlington and Alexandria and like Reston and all these kinds of
Huh.
places.
That's interesting. Why do you like that?
Well, it's pretty white, for one.
Okay.
It's very affluent.
That's racist.
So there's not really.
Yeah, you're a rakist.
Yeah, I know. So there's not really like a large like underclass like you find in a lot of other cities.
Aren't there a lot of Latinos in Nova now?
There may be. I mean, I've never lived there or anything, and I haven't visited too many times. I haven't spent like a ton of time there. But that may be the case. I know there's a lot of Asians, there's a lot of Indians, and there may be a lot of Latinos in some places. But yeah, and it's also very highly forested, and it's hilly in some places, which is nice. So yeah, it's pretty nice.
Based. Okay. That's interesting. So, and you said your second one would be, or I guess it was tied. It was I know you like Portland a lot. Was that what you said? Portland?
Oh God, no. Oh jeez, that had to have been a provocation.
I know.
Because
Yeah.
everyone knows my feelings on Portland.
Well, no, because see, here's the thing.
How dare you!
I did that on
How
purpose.
dare you! How could you?
I did do that on purpose, but before talking to you, I always used to get Portland and Seattle confused because they seem very similar to me. But
No,
I've
absolutely
I've never
not.
been to either. But I guess you have some very strong opinions where you really like Seattle and really don't like Portland.
Okay, well, the thing about Portland is that it has. It's kind of just been this like destination for kind of like burnouts and like these sort of just like washed up, just like ridiculously dumb people for like decades.
Okay.
It's absurdly expensive for some reason because all these people keep moving there. There's like a
I'm gonna
massive.
counter signal you, by the way.
Okay. There's like a massive like underclass, like crime has been an issue there for a long time. Like If you go into like more like eastern parts of downtown, east of the river, there's like apparently like entire swaths of the city have been taken over by like tweakers who like ride around on BMX bikes and like break into cars and steal shit. So it's just bad. I really don't like it.
You said you were going to counter
And I don't like
Herbert?
Yes. So, my counter signal is: do you actually have crime statistics, or is it like, oh, I heard that there was some bad stuff going on? Because I would imagine, given the demographics of Portland, that crime statistics make it pretty low. And furthermore, my understanding is that outside of the downtown, it's basically just sort of like expensive white suburbs.
That's true of like the western suburbs for the most part, but the eastern suburbs are supposed to be really bad. And as for the statistics, violent crime is relatively low compared to a lot of places, but property crime is quite high compared to most other large metro areas.
Because of like Antifa or whatever.
You're going to say something, John?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, he pretty much said what I was going to say. Yeah, the violent crime is pretty low, but like theft and like break-ins and stuff like that, robberies, well, I think like theft in general is like pretty high.
Because people are getting like robbed by Antifa?
Yeah, because you don't own that because it's the property of Antifa.
Wow, okay. I didn't realize that Antifa was in control of the city of Portland.
Oh, and then also
wait, yeah, it's mutualism, so it's not actually stealing, but
also for some reason, like the entire like white like Swipple population of the city like protests every single weekend, like for some inexplicable reason. They like protest about something, and it's supposed to be really obnoxious.
That's Seattle too, though, kind of, right?
Yeah, that's true, but it's not like nearly as big, like proportionally, like in terms of the population. Like you'll get like literally like 2/3 of the entire like white like bohemian population of the entire all of Oregon, like just streaming into like downtown Portland on the weekends, whereas in Seattle it's confined to like around the universities.
Well, one thing that I think is funny is you mentioned like burnouts moving. There were like the one person I know who moved to Portland was like a former attempted Hollywood screenwriter. He didn't like get anything actually like accepted, of course, but he was living in like Echo Park in LA, and like then he moved to Portland in his mid-30s, and now he's like, I think he's like a drug dealer, and like his house. His house which is in eastern Portland, but fairly close to like downtown, like just like east of the river. I think like in the Richmond area or something. His house has been broken into like it was broken into right before he moved, and they stole like the washer and like laundry, and also like
wait, they stole like the washing machine? What the fuck?
Yeah, like
how would you steal that? That's so heavy.
I know, it's insane, and like
dude,
his motorcycle
jacked guy who stole it.
Yeah, well, and since they were in Portland, they had to. Since they were in Portland, they had to take it home on their bike.
Yeah,
and they didn't even have
right. Well, they stole his motorcycle like a year later as well.
Are you sure it was the same person? I mean, I'd like to think.
No, 100%.
Just like.
Oh wait, no, I meant it's the same person he stole from. Oh no, I didn't.
Underclass of Portland.
Okay,
like,
I mean that's what you said. You said they stole his motorcycle a year later, as though
you know what I mean.
Non-human force.
Okay.
It sounds like some Lovecraft shit.
Let's parse the semantics of what you said, and
wow, this podcast is going to be great.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's always good. We always have a good time here on the Curse Discussions podcast. We discuss things in a curse manner.
What are you doing?
Okay, so...
God, you sounded like that one kid that was on here earlier. He was like, well, you know, we're
oh, you talking about Zog?
Oh, well, yeah.
I'll be sure. We have a call out here. I think the next episode...
it's not that it's bad, but he just, like, he's really funny.
The next episode is going to be a debate between Zog and Andrago. Okay. So, as we were talking about, like cities. So, what about in Europe? What would you guys say are the best
So
cities?
are we just like
Good
throwing
question.
out the whole confined to North America thing now?
I said confined to North America for to start with.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, White Knight probably.
Uh,
All right, you can
oh
cut
yeah.
that part out. Sorry.
Well,
Herbert probably knows more about that because he's been to Europe more.
um, well, so I would say that France is fucking garbage and terrible, and no one should ever go there. And London sucks. And
Isn't London pretty based in neoliberal though, right? Like it's got like what's it called? So there's two different Londons, right? There's London and the City of London. But I think the City of London like it's got some weird thing where like so the queen has to like ask permission to like enter there and like corporations get like a vote. Like they like vote on policy or something. I don't
yeah, that's nice and all. My understanding of London is it's a bunch of like unmarried 31-year-old finance employees who like eat microwave Indian dinner every night.
Okay.
Also, the city of London is like a very small area. But anyway, like I don't know that much, like, but Zurich seems cool. Like Switzerland seems pretty
I mean,
based.
Switzerland is just based in general. It's an extremely based country.
Honestly, a lot of Germany is actually pretty nice. Like Munich is like a very nice city. Uh, honestly, Hamburg is not a bad city at all.
I was gonna say
Ber-
my favorite Europeans. Oh, sorry, you can go.
I was gonna say Berlin, like, is okay to visit, but I think living there probably sucks because you'd be surrounded by like fucking people on ecstasy all the time.
Oh yeah, I was. Berlin is like the Portland of Europe, pretty much.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's sort of like a bigger, shittier Portland.
yeah. But I've really only been to like one European city, or I've really only been to one European city for an extended period of time, and that was London. And yeah, it's kind of it does like seem kind of neoliberal in like certain places, but I don't know, it's very tacky in a lot of ways. That's kind of like hard to describe. I can't really like put my finger on exactly how it felt, but it was kind of like it felt kind of like
I
tacky.
was
Like
just
they had like the 2-story coach buses and all this. Oh, yeah, I was just kind of.
like did they have
One
And
thing
also,
that
there's like,
those fucking
and apparently, like all the like inner suburbs of London and like the parts of London that aren't like the inner city are apparently like really crappy now, and crime is skyrocketing. Um, so I mean, that's kind of like generally a trend for European cities, like as opposed to like the U.S. Like the suburbs are typically nicer, whereas in European cities, it's like the inner city that's much
Yeah,
nicer.
that's a really good point. Actually, I think that one major distinction you can make, and the reason why sort of the cities in Europe are less appealing from at least as a place to live, is just the real estate is so much more dense and sort of relatively expensive, and whereas there's this sort of suburban sprawl in the United States outside of the cities, and you can get like a somewhat isolated, domain to yourself. European cities, middle class people live in these like fucking shitty row houses on the outskirts of the city, like they're little bugs and their little rows, like outside
Well,
of London, and yeah.
the weird thing about Europe is that like a lot of people through family, like they'll have like houses and properties passed down through like generations of their family, but they won't ever stay in them because they view property and homes as more like a store of value. Apparently, I think this is mostly true in Germany and like continental Europe more so than the UK and like Ireland, but they view like property and homes as more or less like a store of value. And like for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because like transit, like it's harder to commute from like the rural and suburban areas or whatever, but apparently they just don't ever, a lot of them don't live in these homes that they in properties they've inherited, and instead choose to live in like these detestable, depressing, like row houses built in like the 70s and 80s, like in some like inner suburb of like Berlin or something. It's just really weird.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's something else, right? That in the United States, the sort of, I think in some case, you could the sort of car culture, commuting culture, somewhat arises out of this. In the United States, there's this, this, not to be a fucking memer, but like the lay American dream is I'm going to live in the suburbs. I'm going to own my home. I'm going to have this big, beautiful home to raise my family in while working in the big city or whatever. And in Europe, this sort of idea of home ownership, especially continental Europe, but the UK to more of an extent than the US at least, the idea of owning a home and having a home for a long time as opposed to like being in a little bug apartment or renting or whatever else is less prevalent, I think. And that means that everyone's sort of in these like little cities in their little shitty apartments, as opposed to the United States.
I mean, I think probably the reason that people, are less inclined in Europe to, to invest in like property or whatever is probably because they know that the property is going to be seized by the Politburo, right? Or like.
Well, but you're not wrong. I mean, there is something to that, which is that, and this is a point I made before, that being upper middle class is not really a thing in continental Europe because they have such a large welfare state. They basically need to tax those people into like middle class modes of living. So the type of people who would own a home and a summer home and go on international vacations in the United States, the type of people with those type of jobs in Europe are taxed to such an extent that they live in row houses like everyone else.
And also, it's my understanding that like the wage differential between like regular jobs and a lot of like jobs that we think of as upper middle class in the U.S., like lawyer and software engineer and executive and all this kind of crap, are like the wage differential isn't anywhere near as big in Europe as it is here.
That's true. I do know that doctors in particular have a huge salary in the U.S.
Like, for some reason, the returns to that like high skilled labor in Europe, it's like much lower relative to everything else in Europe. I don't know why, but apparently it is. So like you don't get these people who are, kind of these like McMansion type, like fake rich
exactly.
people.
Yeah, nobody owns a boat. Nobody has a boat in a summer home.
Yeah.
Or if you do, you're the CEO instead of a mid-level manager at Acme Corporation.
You mean the Acme Brick Corporation?
Is that a real corporation? I thought that was just like the thing from Road.
Yeah, it is. I think like Warren Buffett owns it or something.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting. What about Asia? What are the good places?
It's horrible. It's terrible.
Well, Bangalore is a very beautiful.
Yeah, I like to swim in the shit river.
Yeah, I mean, I like to take a stroll down the banks of the Ganges River with a bloated body, just sort of sauntering around next to me in the river. It's a very pleasant experience.
Well, okay, so I was thinking though when I brought up this topic, I was thinking about something I remember you saying, Andriago, which I'm not sure if this is exactly what you said or whatever, but I think you said something to the effect of like that China has modernized so much that if you live on the coast of China, it's basically just like straight up a first world country. Is that what you meant?
Well, it's I wouldn't say that it's first world. I wouldn't say that it's first world, but it's like a lot better than like a lot of people make it out. Than a lot of people think really. Like particularly like if you look at like listings for like. Well, yeah, I should say this is really only this is exclusive to like a few like cities on the coast and like they're kind of like suburban and like ring, like the outer rings of these cities and everything. But if you like look at apartment listings and stuff, like the apartments more or less look first world, and like an upper middle class person in China could afford that. Like all the trains are like very modern, and clean. And I don't know like to what extent like it looks like that just because everything is relatively new or what, but like it almost seems like it's sort of like honestly like a lot of those places look like the living standards are much higher than in say like Russia or the Ukraine or something like that. And the GDP per capita in those places may actually be at about the level of those Eastern European countries or higher. But I don't think there's really like any data on GDP per capita in like Chinese metro areas really. So it would be kind
I
of
think that
hard
China's
to tell
probably
that.
has a higher GDP per capita than some like really atrocidad Eastern European countries. I don't know. Like, does it have a?
I don't know. It's considerably lower than Mexico, but that I think that's like almost exclusively because of like the huge like rural population. There's like apparently like a ton of people in there that in the rural areas that make like less than $1 a day.
Yeah.
So I think that's what drags down its GDP per capita is the rural population.
Well, I want to say, I could be wrong here, but I want to say that, like, Shanghai, like, the GDP per capita is, like, surprisingly high. It's, like, I want to say, like, almost, like, $30,000 a year or something.
Yeah.
Here, let me look this up here. Okay, so I think it's higher than Ukraine. Ukraine, though, is poorer than Russia. Ukraine also is, like, incredibly fucking statist. So, that's probably why it's poor. Checkmate. Bernie Sanders. Which is why I support the Donetsk secession and Luhansk. The Don. No, okay. I actually don't. I don't really know enough.
Okay, yeah, so I'm looking it up, and Shanghai is $33,000 per capita, and Beijing is the same.
Okay.
So, yeah, like, the coastal regions are pretty decent. They're all, like, about 20,000 or higher, and, like, the big cities are, like, 30,000.
But what percentage of China's population lives in those areas?
Probably, like, at least, like, 10 or 20%, I would think. Like, including, like, all the, like, 20,000 coastal regions.
The 20,000 cities.
I think there's a few inland cities that are somewhat decent as well. Like Chengdu and
Or, like,
there's a
Wuhan,
couple
maybe.
other ones. Yeah, there's a couple other ones that are somewhat decent that aren't like complete and utter like hellholes.
Well, like, in a way, like, there's, like, one or two, like, the far western ones, like, like, economically, they're, like, not nearly as nice as, like, the big coastal or near coastal cities, but, like, the nice thing about, like, one or two of them is that, like, they have a lot less pollution, and they're actually, like, a lot prettier, like, around.
Yeah.
They actually have, like, nice natural scenery and stuff.
Yeah, okay. I mean, because China, I know that's one of the main drawbacks for a lot of people of China is that, it's just got huge pollution, huge smog. Like, that's pretty insane that they have to, like, go around with masks covering their face all the time.
Right, it's pretty bad.
So,
yeah, it's bad.
This is deviating a little bit here. Sharp change of topic. I have a would you rather for you all, okay? Would you rather live in Tajikistan or Guyana?
Probably. My gut feeling is Tajikistan, but like because Guyana, the British one, the former British colony.
Yes.
The one in South America, just to be clear.
Yes.
Okay, well, like, I'm pretty sure that's, like, literally, like, the poorest country in South America, so... And it's, like, really, like...
Is it?
Gross and, like, just... It's, like, really swampy and, like, the climate...
Guyana, where the Jonestown Massacre occurred?
Yeah, that's exactly...
It was.
Isn't that where, like... Whatever,
yes,
like,
that's exactly where it was.
Shot? Hilarious.
Yeah, and it's super undeveloped and just, like, gross and swampy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably instantly get some kind of disgusting infection, like, the moment you step foot off the plane.
See, but the nice thing about Guyana is that it's so diverse, right? It's got some Puanlu people. Like, they're, like, a third of the population, then a third is, like, native, and then a third is, like, black. So...
well, yes, it's one of the most religiously diverse
hyper Brazil
in America. It's got Hindus, it's got Muslims, it's got Sikhs, and then of course like Christians of various kinds.
Yeah, it's got Protestants and Catholics. Yeah.
Is their national anthem just like Bah, bah, boo. Bah, bah, boo. The Guyana national anthem.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, that is that is how the lyrics go.
Yeah,
Performed by Lab.
yeah.
Hey, speaking of religious,
It's either.
go ahead.
Oh, okay, well, it was just real quick. Guyana, I think like it or like one of its neighbors, like the Dutch or French Guyana, it has like the largest like Anglican building only made out of wood or something, only made out of wood. But anyway, you go ahead,
What is it,
Chucky.
like a fucking log cabin?
Well, no, I think it's prettier than that, but it's just funny that like it's like the largest like church only made out of wood or something, or like Anglican. I don't know what exactly. But what were you going to
I was
say,
going to say,
Chucky?
speaking of religious diversity, we were talking about that in regards to Guyana. One country that I've always been kind of impressed with its religious diversity is Latvia, because it's almost split like pretty evenly four ways between Lutheranism, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and atheism. Right? Like it's like literally almost quarters.
Well, yeah, that's only because like all like the majority of the Protestants became atheists, and then like during the Soviet Union, like they like forced a bunch of Russians there, like or
Yeah.
like moved a bunch of Russians there. So it's kind of like artificial,
So
but
you're saying it
yeah,
was historically
Well,
Lutheran?
it was historically like three quarters Lutheran, I think, and then like it had um like a southeastern portion of it was Catholic, so it was like 20
That's interesting.
Okay.
thing.
I was gonna ask John, what is your favorite city in the United States?
Well, I don't really know, but I mean, Seattle's pretty cool. I'll agree with you there. Like some of the suburbs of it are pretty cool, and like the city itself seems pretty cool as well. Like
What about
it's
Colin and Herbert? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, anyway, Chucky, do declare that my favorite city in the U.S. is, I don't know, Keene, New Hampshire.
Oh, of
God.
course.
Because that's where they, like, follow, like, meter maids around, right? Like, that's pretty based. I don't know, I thought it was kind of
Excuse me.
interesting, the backlash towards the Free State Project there, Stop Free Keene, and that, like, little campaign. Right? Like,
well, like they were pretty obnoxious. Like I'm not talking about the so much, but like I think there were some pretty obnoxious people involved in that. To be honest, like they were like just smoking weed like in the main public park or something like all the time. Like very, I don't know.
based.
Oh, what about Herbert?
Favorite city in the United States? Well,
Wow.
you're not gonna like this, but I gotta. You know, I had to do it to him. It's gotta be New York.
Bug City.
You know, Bug City,
Okay.
Bug City, New
You-
York.
There's not really much you can say about that. I mean, that's like a super like cliche like answer.
You're not a
but,
fan
like,
of New York, though,
Yeah,
as I understand it
I
on Driver.
know, I know.
I mean, okay, I'm not gonna like completely and utterly shit on New York. Like it's not that bad compared to a lot of other places, but it's not
I would,
that
I would,
great either.
I would say that assuming, like, if you want to be a car sell, obviously New York sucks, right?
I mean,
Totally agree.
New York, not
But
only.
I think,
Sorry to interject here, but not only does New York suck, I think that's sort of an understatement. It's like a bizarre, totalitarian. Like, okay, so I went there fairly recently, right? And I remember just like being so blown away when I realized that you had to like move your car off the street like certain days of the week for it to like sweep, for them to like sweep the streets. Like everyone does that at the same time. That seems like something that would happen in like the Soviet Union or something. It's like so bizarrely authoritarian. Like it's like, okay, everyone like get out of bed and like move your like car to, so like
yeah, but it's like it's not illegal to, but like you can I don't know. You can get it. You can pay for like a parking spot at Bugville parking garage or whatever.
I guess I'm just saying, like, you know,
Not that you like ought to have to, but I guess it's not like everyone's forced to like put their cars here and then move them.
I
or
just
whatever.
thought that was so weird.
But what I was just saying.
Well, I think it probably more like speaks to the mentality of New Yorkers. They're just like, oh, well, okay, I'll do it. Oh.
Well, to be fair, like nobody lives in New York to drive a car, or at least like
that's
if
my
you
point.
have any
Well, yeah, that was
sense.
like my question. Like, how on earth is there parking like at all? Like, really?
Like, so if you're not a car cell, and so if you're not a car cell, then and if New York, if the real estate wasn't like ridiculously expensive, and it was just as like relatively low crime as it is now, I think it would be a city that's well worth living in. But obviously, there's a lot of drawback.
That's something I always found quite strange about New York. The way that so it has like really low crime rates, right? Like I remember there's that shocking statistic. I think you told me about this, Herbert, where there was a year where there were more.
I heard that from. I heard that.
Okay, well,
I heard
let me
an
say it
interview with.
first.
Oh,
Okay.
go ahead. Go ahead.
There was a year where there were more
Okay.
murders depicted on Law and Order than actual murders in Manhattan. So
Yes.
where'd you hear that from?
That was David Simon. That was
I
David
don't know who that
Simon,
is.
the director of The Wire,
Great.
who pointed that out.
Isn't The Wire like?
But,
So you really are a fucking bug. You listen. You watch The Wire.
I mean, any self-respecting bug watches The Wire. But yeah, I mean, New York is it's pretty okay. It's there's nice things.
Oh.
I don't know though.
Oh,
I mean,
sorry.
here's the thing for me. It seems like when you start asking about what's the best city, if we're talking when we think about car culture, right? The best if you have a car, you shouldn't live in a city. You know what I mean? When somebody says like, "Oh, what's a nice city?" It's like, well, even if I liked Seattle, or if I really liked Chicago, or really liked whatever other city, if I had a fucking car, I would live far out in the suburbs and like not live in the city.
You're Europor pilled.
That. Yeah,
because
exactly.
that's what Europors always complain about. They're like, oh, Ooga Durga, your cars, your cities are made for cars, not the people. Mamma mia. Guten Tag.
I don't know. I think the thing about it though is I completely understand the allure of car culture, right? Because there's just something that there's some you are to some extent a cuck if you're a grown man with a wife and children, and if you want to go from one place to another, you have to fucking shepherd them onto some dirty train to take them there. Like that, you should be ashamed. Like you failed as a man if that happened.
Well, yeah,
No,
you failed as a
into your
man. You
chariot.
failed as a man if you're at the behest of some landlord too, probably.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree. It's the same sort of idea that like there's a certain sort of like masculine sort of just in ownership and agency that comes with car culture, car travel, home ownership. These are things that yeah.
And also, there's actually a really good blog called, or not a blog, but like a website. It's run by, I think, or the main contributor to it is Joel Kotkin, and it's called New Geography something. I forget what the domain is, but it's New Geography is the website. And well, everyone now thinks that it's like trendy to, live in the city, live in some fucking place like New York or San Francisco or Boston and live in the inner city. But it's really not true. The vast majority of millennials, including ones that rent, would prefer to own. Actually, this trend slowed down a little bit after 2008. Like from 2008 to 2013, 14, I believe inner cities were growing almost as fast as suburbs, but that's reversed now. And for quite a few years, suburbs and like small metro areas have been growing considerably faster than inner cities. Um, and and it turns out people who live in inner cities, most of them, or not, I don't know about most of them, but a pretty large contingent of them plan to move to the suburbs in the future.
It's the
Well, like I think I've like mostly read that like probably suburbs like went out a little bit, but that like actually like people are about like evenly divided with suburbs like winning on whether they like to live in like a city or like a suburb. But like overwhelmingly, what people actually do is like the past few years, I think, have been like some of the like biggest years of suburbanization in like a long time. Like people are
Yeah,
overwhelmingly moving to the suburbs, especially like I think the past 3 or 4 years, like you
That's
said.
interesting because that's not the narrative we usually hear. We usually hear about
no, it's
yuppies
not.
being like the
And the
shock
point is that that's
troops of
probably
gentrification and shit like that.
well, the thing is that a lot of that is like more or less a PR campaign. Like cities, like actual cities, like city governments spend millions upon millions of dollars
Yes, that's absolutely true.
on PR campaigns, that put out this idea that inner cities are the new like hip place to be.
Well, like
Um,
one thing that I think is true that like a lot of suburbs, like especially in their so-called downtown areas or whatever, they are trying to capitalize on the new urban like meme, and like they're trying to have like little cores of like walkable like
Yeah, yeah,
areas
yeah,
that like
yeah, yeah.
have a
yeah,
bunch
that's
of.
that's true. I think a lot of like larger suburbs with like over like 25 to 50,000 people are kind of like trying to develop. That's not a meme. A lot of places are trying to develop more walkability and like bike paths. Like that's not a meme.
That shit. Oh my.
But yeah,
The idea. Oh my god. The idea of like a couple fucking lesbianic 28-year-old feminists who like live in the middle of nowhere and like on the weekends they drive to some like two-horse town that has 5 blocks of like walkable streets and they just go into like all the shitty record stores. Like I literally just want to like eat an entire bottle of sleeping pills thinking about that. Oh my god. That's terrible.
See, I never really got this whole like walkability meme. Maybe this is because I'm a little bit rattling bog myself, right? But I've always found that like like
you want to ride around an
no,
ATV?
no, I mean like if a street is like I've walked like alongside like fairly busy streets where there doesn't have a sidewalk, just like grass on the side of the road before, right? Like I I don't really give a fuck. I'm not trying
Where the fuck
Well,
were
yeah,
you?
I
In
know, but you're fucking
Mississippi?
autistic.
to.
Are you
I've done
talking
this
about like
There's
multiple.
a
a
busy
certain
I've
street.
done this
college city?
multiple times, right? Like just
Are you talking about the college, certain college
I'm talking
city?
about. Okay, so I've done this in.
Say that more
Yeah,
autistically, please.
please. I've
Yeah.
done this in college cities. I've done this in, kind of exurbs. Just there's all sorts of places that don't have sidewalks on the side of like busy roads that where you just like need to walk somewhere sometimes. I mean, this is mostly I did this when I was like a younger like teenager before I could drive, I guess.
One thing that really triggers me about we were talking about these PR campaigns that these cities are running to make it seem like you should live in cities, you should have kids and raise them in cities in big cities, whatever, is how they
Pretty
try to
bullshit.
portray their public transit systems as these sort of like community like meeting points as
Oh God.
like in New York it's like, oh, everyone rides the MTA subway and it's people of all diverse backgrounds and stations in life and they all just come together on for this experience and I think a lot of other cities do the same sort of thing and it's just so far from the truth and they just fight so hard like
It's
some of it
newspeak.
is like transit bug. Yeah, some of it is transit bug. Like some of it kind of goes off of these like really nerdy guys who are like, oh, like the dictionary that they're putting in the new train, like I'm.
Are you calling
ooh,
out
that's
Alex
what I do
Forrest, a
instead of
guest on this
sports. Like,
podcast?
maybe. But then
Well, I mean,
but
I
then
don't think he even likes like those campaigns and stuff. Like, I'm pretty sure, like I don't know. But what's your favorite entertainer in your like trains, White Knight? Like, have you ever had like a
Herbert.
really good one?
yeah, forget it.
Or well,
Um,
you'll edit.
no,
You can edit that out for.
I think all subway performers should be killed, but particularly Showtime. Actually, I'll tell you two stories. I have two stories for the listeners. Well, I have like one general phenomenon for listeners who've never been on a New York subway, and that which is Showtime, which is when a young urban youth, or sometimes a couple of young urban youths, get onto the subway with a boombox that's blasting out hip hop music, African American music, and then they start doing dances that involve hoisting themselves with the subway railings above people sitting in the chairs in extremely
Right.
dangerous and conspicuous ways. And they say it's showtime. And then what they do recently is instead of just at the end saying, "Okay, give us money" or whatever, they say, "Hey y'all, nobody even got hurt. You all hooked up with some money, like nobody even got hurt. You know what I'm saying?" As if they should be paid
It's
like a fucking
protect-
protection racket. Yeah, literally, like, oh, no one, everyone survived this. Everyone survived this invasion, so you should pay us. But then, the funniest like subway performer, mass transit performer I've ever encountered was this guy who was like playing a sort of, I guess you would call it like a sort of flamenco style guitar and singing. So he had like a sort of like acoustic guitar. I was playing like a very sort of Spanish flamenco-y sounding chords, and then he was just improvising lyrics on top. And he started just looking around, and uh, talking before about our fucking diverse community hub that is mass transit systems in big cities. He was looking around at the ethnic diversity on the train and just riffing off that. So he has his little guitar and he's strumming along and he looks over and he sees some Indian guys and he goes, "Biryani, biryani, oh biryani," and then he sees a couple of Japanese guys or whatever and he goes, "Sushi, teriyaki," and he just kind of goes around the train and people started realizing it. And I think some people were a little offended, but most people just thought it was pretty
That
funny.
is pretty funny.
If you want a picture of the future, imagine like a small brown man shrieking about diversity forever
On the New York subway. Okay.
But yeah, like the thing about a lot of these cities do push this whole like public transit meme, and it's like really the only city or metro area that really has like an actual like developed like mass transit system is like really New York. Like there's a few other places that sort of have like these like sort of sad attempts at it, like DC and Boston and Chicago and San Francisco and all these places, but they're like really terribly atrocious and they have like very low like ridership.
Yeah,
And
DC's really fucking sucks.
and they're just universally horrible. Like everyone says that like, oh well, San Francisco has BART and like all this crap, but like BART is literally like just completely unusable. Like it literally goes to like two places. It goes to like two fucking places, and like the trains are like so small. Like there's all these people that post these videos of like the BART train at like 8 in the morning or whatever in the San Francisco Bay Area. And they're like 2 times as packed as like any New York subway you'd ever find. Like people are literally so crammed together that they like push people out of the train like whenever it stops at a stop. Like people literally push other people out of the train
China pilled.
when the BART train comes to a stop. Yeah, it's more or less China. It pretty much is.
Something I wanted to say, this is a point I was trying to make earlier about the grittiness of New York City, where we were talking about how New York has so few murders, so little crime nowadays compared to, for example, when it was just a total.
It's because Rudy. It's because Rudy Giuliani cleaned up the city.
Well, that's actually a really interesting point. That's
right,
like you talk about the culture of New York City.
Okay.
okay.
Here we go.
Okay.
I'm
Never
asserting
mind.
my I just peed on your
I'll be-
fucking leg, Herbert. All right.
Okay.
I wanted to say though. So, compared to the 70s when it was a complete atrocidad, New York has a lot less crime now. But you wouldn't really, get that feeling, like when you're just walking around in it and you notice how fucking filthy the streets are, how, it looks completely, terrible, right? Like, it looks so gritty and shit, right? Like, compared to, a city like Chicago, right? Where Chicago has an infamously high crime rate. But just walking around, it looks like it wouldn't have a higher crime rate, at least until you get to fucking Madison Street and the La Luz Extinguido areas of the city, because it's very segregated.
Well, if you had I think there's a few. I think if you did a population weighted crime rate, you looked at the crime rates individually, for certain zip codes or whatever, the city of Chicago, and you weighted it based on the population of each of those zip codes and added it all up, then it would be pretty low. I mean, maybe it wouldn't be lower than New York City, but the crime rate of Chicago, it wouldn't be anywhere near as absurdly high as it is when you just do the average crime rate, because there's this one massively huge swath of the city that's just completely just packed to the brim with these vibrant peoples who are just constantly warring, and so that drives up the average crime, even though most areas of the city isn't really
And the north
that
side
bad.
of Chicago is pretty nice, and by the lake and everything.
Yeah.
What else are we gonna say? Oh, okay, yeah, but Mr. Herbert, I would invite you to now make your point, sir.
Well, New York City historically was not a sort of yuppie hipster urbanite bug liberal Democrat type of city. Historically, New York City was a fairly diverse city, but a very segregated city with ethnic neighborhoods of various European and non-European ethnicities. And so that history sort of survives in the sort of primarily Italian American, but also somewhat Irish and ethnic American diaspora around the periphery of New York City, and as the generations have moved on, moving out into North Jersey and Staten Island and Long Island, as well as a few who are still on the sort of edges of the outer boroughs. And those people have a very different sort of cultural, political type outlook, shall we say, than the stereotypical upper middle class New York bug. And their political philosophy seems to basically be centrist, proto-fascism.
That's a good way to describe it.
And that's
Chris
basic.
Christieism.
Yeah, that's Chris
Christieism.
Chris Christie, Rudy Giuliani.
We love our firefighters. Our firefighters.
Yeah, fucking. If you guys have ever heard of him, I think the mascot for this political ideology is Bo Dietl. If you've ever come across Bo Dietl,
Yeah.
there's a handful of these guys, and they're still in New York. They're politicians.
Yeah, it's really
Long Island.
weird.
Fucking Italians. They
This is
basically
something
brought
that-
fascism from Italy, to New York City.
Well, I think you actually get this in a lot of East Coast cities where you kind of have this red tribe fringe that's sort of
But they're not. But
in the inner suburbs.
They're like, yeah, my niece, she's a lesbian. I don't got any problems with the gays, and I smoked a little doobie when I was in high school. I think we should be legalized and all. But I swear to God, if you disrespect the boys in blue, we're gonna launch a nuke at Iran, and you're gonna be.
You know what it's like?
It. You know what I mean?
You know what the archetype? It's the archetype of if anyone's ever seen the movie Blue Jasmine, it's the guy from that movie, the shitty ex-husband or whatever.
That guy. Who the fuck is that? That's Dice Clay. The guy.
Yeah.
From Blue Jasmine is literally Andrew Dice Clay, who's a total New York we're gonna fucking kill all the moolies, if you fucking commit crime on these streets, the NYPD and the FDNY.
Remember 9/11. Remember the 9/11.
Yeah. Remember the volunteers at 9/11? They're getting their full pensions, by the way.
Well, yeah.
I don't
Well, the
like
interesting
paying the high
the
taxes.
interesting
They're
thing
getting
is
their pensions.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that like New York sort of developed into this like blossoming kind of like upper middle class like Swipple like sort of bug mass or whatever you want to call it, or at least Manhattan and Brooklyn did like after like the 70s, because previously the places that were like that were like only pretty much like confined to like San Francisco and like maybe like Cambridge, Massachusetts, and like a few other like stupid college towns. But like after the 70s, it started like redevelop like a lot of these like luxury condo and like apartment developers came in, and actually one of them was Donald Trump, which is pretty interesting. He was like one of the main ones that came in and started building, scooping up all this like real estate for like absurdly cheap prices and redeveloping them into these like luxury condos, and that like kind of gave birth to this sort of redevelopment, you might call it,
Well, I
of
think I think it's not
Manhattan.
merely real estate. I think that the other thing that was sort of going on was this sort of class shift in the United States that David Brooks has called the Bobos, that Charles Murray sort of described in a couple of his books. But it's basically, I think that whereas in the past, these sort of like high IQ people who are prone to a sort of cosmopolitan culture would have been relatively isolated in like small to mid-sized cities across the United States, and maybe they would have had like little enclaves. Maybe they would have had a country club they went to, or a certain restaurant or group of people that they hung out with. They would still be relatively isolated in their communities among normies. But now we're in a sort of paradigm where they all go to, their elite schools on the coasts and never to return to the heartland, and they've just sort of they've all sort of concentrated in some of these large urban centers, and that is so New York is like, New York is not necessarily. I think a generation ago this was even more true, but it's still pretty true now, even though a lot of people are the children of those people from a generation ago. But a generation ago, it was New York was all the smart, cosmopolitan-prone people from all across the country coming together to be smart and cosmopolitan-prone together. And that wasn't the case in 1960, but it was the case by 1980.
That's funny.
Um,
I'm wondering then if the phenomenon you're describing sort of functioned as like a brain drain for the rest of the country. Like, do you think
well,
the
absolutely. I mean,
average
that's
IQ
like
of
the
like
premise.
South Dakota like
Yes,
lowered
yes.
because of New York City existing?
That's the premise. That's the premise of both the bell curve and coming apart. Basically, that these elite institutions became very efficient mechanisms for segregating people of high IQ and people of sort of middling IQ in a way that wasn't in a way that wasn't really common in American history before that.
Well, also, I mean, they didn't just move to New York City for no reason to be near these higher learning institutions. It's because with IQ is increasingly, or well, income is increasingly sorted by IQ now. Most, like the vast majority, like high income sectors have increasingly been, sort of clustering in a few places too, like New York and DC and Boston and the Bay Area. Um, so I think there's that effect too. That I think that's probably a more significant driver
Wait,
Yeah,
what
than
did you just say?
what he's saying is that they've
well, I
moved
mean,
out
well,
to the rationalist group house in the Bay Area, so they can all read smart opinions
it's
articles.
because how income is increasingly sorted by IQ, right? And these sort of
Sure.
like clusters of industries that require like that you have a high IQ to work in them, or at least somewhat high IQ, like finance and like software engineering and law, are like largely clustered in like large coastal metro areas.
Well, that's a chicken egg question, right? Why do you think that? But finance is a bit more historically grounded, but software is clustered in the areas that it is because the people who found software companies all went to college together at Caltech or Stanford. You know what I mean? They all went to Stanford together, and then they graduated and they moved to San Francisco for a couple of years, and a bunch of them founded companies that the other ones went and worked for. So that, like, my point is that, like, it's not that people went to California, went to San Francisco to join tech companies. No, I mean, I guess so, but those tech companies were started because people went there to go to Stanford. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess you could say the same thing about like MIT too, and a bunch of those other places.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, the Ivy League schools and all that.
Well,
yeah.
what I would say is that we are about out of time for today. Anyone have like a final point they want to make quickly? No? Okay. Well, this has been the Curse Discussions podcast. You can write us an email at cursediscussions@gmail.com. I don't think we've gotten any emails yet, but we'll keep checking them.
That was depressing.
So, yeah, obviously, we have the fucking podcast on, what's it called, Pocket Casts now, which is done through Anchor, so you can download the shit there. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye.这一半生大家所